It is somehow, in fact, the year 2026, and that is the first and last time I will be mentioning that. So, Happy New Year if you feel like that applies to you. If not, just welcome to another day on the floating rock in space. Last year, I read 31 books on the floating space rock. You can call that number high, you can call that number low. I don't really care. That's how many books I read. So, I read about 2.6 books a month, and my two high reading months were March and December. In both of those months, I read 5 books total. My average star rating is a 3.2. And I do feel like that's kind of reflective of the year I had reading last year. There were very few books that were so bad they drove me to physical rage. And there were also very few books where I was like, wow, that's amazing, limited notes. So yeah, my average rating was a 3.2. I already told you that the most books I read, and then a grand total of almost 3,000 pages read, so 2,983 pages read total over the course of last year. I'm very happy with that amount. It was kind of my first full year getting back into reading, so I feel like it was a good year. But with those stats done, we're going to move into my tier ranking. I've actually never done one of these, but I've watched a lot of people do them. So I've set mine up. It looks like this. I am going to be screen recording, but it looks like this. And because I really couldn't come up with super creative names for my tier list, I decided to rank my books based on the Chicago sports franchises that made me the least mad over the past 12 to 18 months. So, our highest tier that we have is going to be the Chicago Bears. Listen, this year we've had a complete turnaround, okay? Ben Johnson has come in and just truly done some magical work because, oh my God, the amount of nail biting down to the last second, how did we win that game wins we have had this year? Incredible. We've won 11 games this year. 11 games this year. I'm pretty sure that's more games than we've won in like the past 2 or 3 years combined. 11 games this year. We won our division. We're in the playoffs. So naturally, that's going to be my top rank on this chart. We are moving in the right direction. We are bringing pride to the city instead of shame. It's good. It's looking good. Our next tier here is going to be the Chicago Cubs. Baseball hasn't started, but last season, the Cubs won more than 50% of their games. They made it into the first round of the playoffs, and they did get knocked out, but we're on the right track. Okay, we're on the right track to being able to be really freaking annoying again. Then we have the Blackhawks. Listen, last season, were we good? No. But this year, we're doing better. Okay, the record's already improved from last year. I think last year we were either second to last or third to last in our division. But right now we're riding right in the middle of the pack. But also the Blackhawks get a really big boost on this list because of pure childhood nostalgia. When I was a kid and living in Chicago, the Blackhawks were the sports franchise in the city. We won 3 championships. We had so many incredible players. I was watching Patrick Kane, Patrick Sharp, Duncan Keith, Andrew Shaw. Like, it was a great time to be a Hawks fan. So they are going to be right there because truly, based off nostalgia alone, they will never ever be lower than this for me. Like, I love the Blackhawks. Then we have Bulls. Okay. The Bulls are also in the middle of a turnaround. You know, last season wasn't great, but right now I'm pretty sure they've won around half their games. It's still earlier in the season, but you know, they've won around half those games so far, and it looks like we're on the right path to turning things around. I just need these dudes to stop getting hurt, please, for the love of God. But that's the Bulls, and then the White Sox are on the bottom. They won't. They won 37% of their games last year, so they're just gonna stay right down there. Something. But okay, that's my tier ranking list. Oh, also, I'm going to be going through my reading journal from last year just to see if I have any notes that kind of help dispel my ranking a little bit. And when I go through and do summaries and things like that, please know that I'm not going to be looking up anything, and all of my summaries will be purely from memory, which means they may be wrong. Here we go. First book, that I literally read on January 5th last year, started reading, was Free Food for Millionaires by Min Jin Lee. I really, here's the thing with star rating, star system. I don't pay much attention to it. I do it in like my book tracker just so I can have like a general vibe of what I was felt the book was like, but there's always retrospection and all of that. So for this on my thing, it has like just a little basically thermometer of how much you like the book, with this being bad and this being good. And I like that because it can be very subjective. So this one, if you fill it up, it looks like around like 4.5, 4 stars if you want to quantify it like that. But it's high on the thermometer. This book is definitely, I would consider it literary fiction. It follows, oh God, I don't even remember character names at this point. This is the summary that I wrote for this book. In Queens, New York, an eclectic young Korean girl named Casey is trying to carve her own path, but her own ambitious wants keep seeming to set her back, both morally and financially. She's been introduced to the best the world has to offer during her undergraduate studies at Princeton, but nothing now seems to equal that. Around her, we see others, perfectly made lives, being far from so behind closed doors. So for this book, it took me a while to get through. I started on the 5th. I ended it on the 16th. The notes I have on this book is that Casey isn't a good person, nor is she particularly smart, but at the same time, she isn't the worst person in the world, and she isn't dumb. And I also said all but 2 of the men in this book suck. I also made a note that says that I feel like the ending happened so abruptly, and that a lot of character storylines end up being open-ended. We know what happens to Ella, which I believe is her friend, and David, but are left wondering about Leah, Unu, Casey, Tina. From what I remembered, it felt very realistic in the sense that there was no perfect person. There was no villain in this story. It was very realistic and very grounded, and I feel like that's very much so a standout point of Min Jin Lee's writing. If you've ever read Pachinko, that book does have obvious villains, I will say that, but it is still super grounded in reality. She usually does, multi-generational or multiple connected families with her writing. So I'm going to put this book, again, retrospectively, I think I'm going to put it in. Oh my gosh, wait, now I can't decide. I think for now, because I know that I would read it again most likely, I think I'll put it in the Blackhawks tier. Next book is You Should Be So Lucky. So in the middle of reading this book, I stopped reading. So I started reading this on the 16th, the day after I finished Free Food for Millionaires, and I finished it in March, which is no fault of Cat Sebastian at all. I love this book. On my little thermometer thing, it's almost filled all the way up to the top. I just got caught up doing a bunch of things. This is a historical LGBTQ romance. Mark is a journalist that is struggling. He's not a struggling journalist. And from my memory, to kind of get back into the swing of things, writing wise, he gets reassigned to the sports column, and he gets stuck interviewing and doing a column on Eddie, who was just traded to New York, and he was this amazing ball player at his last club that was somewhere in Middle America. I think it was St. Louis, but then he got traded to New York and just nothing. He's in this huge batting slump. At his old team, he was hitting home runs left and right, and now it's just nothing. So the whole city hates him, and he just can't settle down. He can't get a grip on like anything. Really bad time for him. And then on the flip side, Mark is, like I said, just a human being struggling. He's been through a lot of grief recently, and he's still trying to kind of get over it. So for this book, my notes say that the writing style for Mark was one of my favorite parts about this book, and I still agree with that. And I know I still agree with that because it was so good that I remember. He is such a blunt character. It's great because normally bluntness can come across as rude or mean, but he's just so like cut and dry, matter of fact, doesn't blink, isn't trying to hurt your feelings, but moves on. And I really love that for him. And then I said, I love that Cat Sebastian was able to write an interesting and entertaining romance story without falling into common and predictable tropes. Yes, this is definitely one of the better romance books that I read all of last year. And so, because of that, ironically, I will put this in the Chicago Cubs tier. Is The Personal Librarian. This one, I started on March 5th. I finished on the 15th. And this book is a fictionalized retelling of the life of Belle da Costa Green, the personal librarian to banking tycoon J.P. Morgan. What is even more remarkable about her than being a woman whose knowledge of fine art and manuscripts rose her to prominence in the art world is the fact that she was a black woman, a passing black woman who hid her identity as she rose to prominence. It is truly remarkable. Remember, this is my summary. This is not a professional summary, so some of the wording doesn't make sense. I actually only gave this one, I think it's a little under half of the full thermometer. I'm using this because it's way better than a star feeling, I feel like. A star ranking, I feel like. Um, just because there was a lot of instances of, not a lot, there was a point of introducing conflict just for it to be solved a few sentences later. And some of the writing sometimes came across. The only way I can describe this is if you've seen Avengers Endgame, there's a scene in it where they have all the female superheroes in the Marvel Universe that they've introduced thus far come together to, like, I think they're tossing around Thanos' gauntlet. Wow, that's sad. But it seems so forced because when you go back and watch 5 seconds before that scene, they were all very much so doing completely different things on completely opposite sides of this massive battlefield, and the whole scene just felt like it wanted to write girl power across the screen, and like it just didn't hit the same, as if they had just done it in sequencing and made it like less obvious, you know? So there was a little bit of that in there. Overall, I feel like the story and the history of the book itself was super interesting. Um, in the United States of America, there are probably more stories than we know about people who were passing, which basically means you were black but you looked white. So they were able to get good jobs and get to higher places because of that. I feel like it's a very interesting part of American history. But for this book in particular, I'm just going to go ahead and put it in the Bulls tier and move on. The writing was great. The story was interesting. It was by no means a bad book, just a little bit slow and at some points a little bit disjointed, like within the plot. Okay, then we have truly the strangest book I read all year. And what makes this book, like, I don't know if it made it weirder or like, I don't know what it was. So during the time frame that I read this book, literally 313 to 321, I was in South Korea. I started this book on the plane ride there and I read it the entire duration of my trip. This book is so weird. It was so strange. I wanted to read it again because I need to know how Sylvia Moreno Garcia came up with this. It's incredible. Like, retrospectively, I feel like I should have given this a higher rating. If you're thinking about reading this book, do it, but be prepared for it to be strange. I'm going to read my context again, and then if there's something that I feel like I need to add, I'll add it, but we'll see. Okay, the book follows Naomi, a young heiress from Mexico City, who goes out to the countryside to check on her recently married cousin after a series of distressing letters. What was once a simple check-in mission quickly falls apart when the family her cousin married into traps her in their lives, bound and surrounded by a certain kind of magic. Yeah, I think that sums it up, actually. I did a really good job on that one. That gives you just enough to know about what happens in like the first 1 or 2 chapters, and then to keep wanting to go through and read more. For my notes on this book, though there might be more stored on my Kindle, I say early on this book is giving major, major Get Out vibes. Like when you're sitting watching that movie and you're yelling at him to leave, that was me reading this. Like you get there, she drives up for the first time, and I'm like, girl, turn around, go back home, because it was not, no, get out. I also noted that despite this length, the book was extremely dense and atmospheric. I don't remember off the top of my head how long the book is. It's not long, but it's also not short. But I mean, Silvia Moreno Garcia really manages to pack a lot in the page count that she ended up with. And like I said, it's really atmospheric. You can see everything she's describing as she describes it, which I don't have an issue seeing books play out in my head. Trust me, that's not an issue at all. But I usually have trouble sticking with the details that the author has written. But for her, I was seeing everything as she wrote it down. I did say the story seemed to slow down and become repetitive about halfway through, but literally 10 pages later, the whole plot switches up and the entire book is back to being extremely intense. So I think I'm going to go ahead and put this in the bears tier. I feel like really looking back at it, this book had everything that you need to make an interesting story, and I would love, and I mean love, to see what a screen adaptation of this would look at. The next book I read last year was I Hope This Doesn't Find You by Anne Liang. I read this one in one sitting on the plane on the way back from South Korea. I finished Mexican Gothic on the plane, and then I started and finished this one while I was on the plane. So what does that tell you? It was fast, it was short, and it was entertaining. And it was well written enough for you to just keep turning the pages, keep tapping away at the screen. I literally wrote on the thing, it's a great read. It's great for a lighthearted read. Nothing super intense happens in this book, but it still has enough of a story and a plot for it to be interesting and to have something to say, I guess, is kind of how I would phrase that. And also, it is like an academic rivals to lovers story, which I feel like is kind of one of the more realistic takes you can use of that trope in modern day setting. So, for a quick summary, I wrote Sadie hates Julius. They have been in competition for first place in everything for almost all of their school years. But Julius is perfect, annoyingly so. He doesn't need the accolades like Sadie. If she can't get into the university of her dreams, then not just her life, but her family's life will fall apart. But then and then at the bottom of this, I wrote, but why is Julius so damn handsome? So for my notes, I said, did read young because it's for a younger audience, which sometimes happens with YA, sometimes doesn't. I literally just finished rereading everything, and that is YA, but it doesn't read as YA as this one did. But I already have another one of her books that I want to read, so I definitely would not discourage from reading it for that reason. And also, like I said, I read this in one day on a plane, so my memory might be foggy. On page 25, and I feel like throughout the book, one of the biggest problems I have is that Sadie had no backbone. And if you know anything about like very academically focused girls, it's that they do tend to have a pretty big backbone because they're very focused on a goal, and they don't like academic dishonesty. They don't like their classmates who are trying hard. All of these things, and if people come to them for help, they will look at them dead in the face and say no. But she didn't, and I've literally made a note about that. I said on page 25, I said, I know this is important to her character arc, but can she please have a backbone? I'm frustrated on her behalf because I inhabit this exact character arc, but I was never walked over like this. And then I said the female main character was a great character to read the perspective of, and her anxiousness felt real. That's your warning for this. Main female character Sadie is very anxious, and you can tell. And literally, as I was sitting on the plane, I was feeling her anxiety. So that's not something you want to read about. I would not read this book. But if you are trapped in a plane, then it might be the book for you. Anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and put this right in the middle of the pack. Blackhawks tier. Boom. Done. Now we have Unloved by Peyton Corinne, aka one of the only authors that I read multiple books from last year. This book is the second book in a interconnected standalone romance. You get the picture. So this book follows Freddie, who's the main male character, and Ro, which I believe is short for Rosalie. It follows their relationship as it were. My summary for this book is the first time they met is the point where all of their romantic fantasies start in the moment he doesn't remember. Freddie is a hockey star who could have been done with college if not for his own determination to finish despite his multiple learning disabilities. Ro is his new, overachieving tutor stuck with his case that everyone, her boyfriend included, can't help. But Ro is determined to help him pass. If he passes, all her academic ambitions can come to pass. My notes for this book say her ex-boyfriend pissed me off, which is a good thing. Like the writing wise, that's a good thing. Yes. I feel like there are some parts, specifically with Freddie's character, that got brushed aside in favor of Rose's storylines. I still concur with that. I feel like I was mainly talking about a very important part of his character, which was his sense of worth that came from his physical attributes that we never really got a proper conclusion on, in my opinion. I also made a note, which is not specific to this book, but just romance books in general, that says, can we please get away from this whole the only way to epilogue a romance book is with marriage and kids? It was so unsatisfying to see Rose's character arc end that way, mostly because she had very high career ambitions and we got none of that context. Even if it was in addition to that, it still was like, oh yeah, that career she wanted, who cares? So for that, I marked this one like a little bit above average, but I think I would stick it like right in the middle. We'll go ahead and put that in the Blackhawks tier. Welcome to the Human Dong Bookshop. So this one, Welcome to the Human Dong Bookshop. It's a contemporary literary fiction. It's originally written in Korean. First of all, this book has so many amazing quotes. Amazing, amazing quotes. In this little reading journal that I keep, it has a place for you to pull like your favorite phrase or your favorite quote. The one I pulled came from 264. Because it's our first life, worries are plenty and anxieties too. Because it is our first life, it's precious. Because it's our first life, nobody knows what will happen in 5 minutes. So good. I literally wrote on the to be recommended section, people that listen to RM solar projects and wonder what else he's thinking. I also said that I would recommend this book. I'm doing some extra sections from this one because this is a retrospective, really high ranking book for me from last year. I said people who need a book to fall asleep, and I say that in the most positive way. Every single time I picked up this book while I was laying in bed going to sleep, I fell asleep in 5 minutes. And it wasn't because it was boring, it wasn't because the writing was bad, it was because the atmosphere was so wonderful and calming that I would go out like a light. There's a lot of character, but it's again so grounded in reality and just people being tired of everything. She was, if I'm remembering correctly, she had a very high achieving career in some field and she got burnt out and she said, you know what, this is my new dream. My dream is to open a bookshop. And so that is what she does. And she turns it into basically cornerstone of her community. And like I said, it's just really, really great book. Some of my notes say it's a simple story, but a book I would like to read twice, maybe a hardcover next time. Yes. I said Hwang Bu-ram is artful in her use of dialogue and description to develop the relationships between the characters and creating a setting that was warm, cozy, and realistic. I said there were points when the series seemed to drag, but it could have just been the nature of the book, as it is following characters more closely than a dramatic, winding plot. And therefore, Welcome to the Human Dong Bookshop will be going in the top tier for last year. And like I said, when I originally put this here, you see that? All that extra space. But retrospectively, it was one of the best books I read last year, truly. Next book is Saving Six by Chloe Walsh. I have beef with my Barnes & Noble because these were stocked in the YA section of my Barnes & Noble. So when I first read the first one, prior to knowing information about the author, by the way, I was shocked and appalled and really wanted to call them and tell them that you need to take this book out of the YA section, that this is not YA. I literally purposely wrote on the genre for this adult romance because this is not it. So for context, I said, I know people say not to play the Trauma Olympics, but if they exist, Joey is winning by a mile, facing abuse at the hands of his father, neglect by his mother, and forced to raise his siblings, His world is on fire. The only thing that seems to smell with flames is the beautiful Alfie Malloy. This is the story of boy sees girl, girl meets boy, and both go to hell and back again, but only for each other. I said that this book was drawn out, a little melodramatic, but overall pretty good. And then I said, if the CW is looking for new material, here it is, because if you know, you know. I'm also going to wrap in the next one to this part. Taming Seven, again, Chloe Walsh. This one was really disappointing. Each of these books eventually follows a different couple in this group of friends that go to the same private school in Ireland. For context on this one, I said Golden Boy loves Golden Girl but feels like he will never be enough because of something that happened as a child, and she believes that he is perfect. He just sees himself as lost. So my only note that I came up with for this book was nothing really happens for the first two-thirds of this book. It has a lot of these two characters participating in the stories of others instead of leading to their own. So I feel like this was definitely a case of the author had an idea of what she wanted it to lead to and what she wanted all of these big characteristic reveals to be, but she had no idea what was going on for the other parts of the plot. So I'm going to put Saving 6 in Bulls and Taming 7 in White Sox. And we're going to move on. Okay, next. You see this? Look at that. It's fully colored in. The Swans of Harlem. I read the version that was adapted for young adults. So there is two versions. One with a gold cover that is for adult readers, and with a pink cover that is adapted for young adults. But I did not have any issues or feel like it was dumbed down at all reading the version adapted for young adults. So I don't know exactly what other details were put in the other version, but this one was fine to me. It follows 5 black dancers who were the founders of the Dance Theater of Harlem that paved the way for young black, specifically ballet dancers, not just in Harlem or not just in New York City, but in the United States of America. It follows that core original group of 5 dancers who really helped get this whole thing started. So for my context and my kind of summary of this book, I put putting a spotlight on the dancers who once stood on the center stage but have now been shoved into the wings. The Swans of Harlem follows the lives and careers of the 5 young dancers who were pivotal in the founding of the Dance Theater of Harlem, paving the way for young black dancers all around the world. My notes on this book is that it was incredible. Like, seriously, it was nonfiction, and I don't read nonfiction. I think it's the only nonfiction book on this list. And it was beautifully written, well researched, and really helped shine a light on people who have been just kind of erased from the narrative. So I would really encourage you to read it. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in my top tier. It was also such a good read for me because I love ballet. I grew up doing ballet. And for me, the only very famous black dancer that came to mind was Misty Copeland. So then finding out that essentially there were 5 other dancers before her, that kind of helped make her career possible, even if we, the general public, didn't know about it, was super, super cool to learn about. So let's talk about Yellowface. First of all, this book, I have not read Catopsis yet, so, but I know this will still be true even when I do read it. This book is R. Kwong's most approachable work by a mile. If you started to read Babel or the Poppy War trilogy and you were like, my brain can't do this, and so you gave up on reading R. Kwong, read this one. Because this one is not as dense and is extremely approachable. The genre says that's contemporary fiction slash thriller. In my opinion, this is not a thriller. So for context, I wrote a really short summary, and I feel like I was trying to kind of maybe embody one of the characters when I wrote this, but I essentially said, it's so hard being a white woman in the writing world. If I was a person of color, my work will be published, and I will be a literal darling. Oh look, my dead frenemy's manuscript. June is essentially the main character of this book, and she has a friend slash rival named Athena, who's basically a self-insert for Ara Kwan herself. And June, who is white as fresh snow on the ground, believes that one of the reasons why her friend has seen success and publishing deals and Netflix adaptations is because she is Asian. And, publishing just only wants people of color on their rosters, and white people no longer have any space in the industry, and it's just not there. So one night, I'm literally not even lying. This woman was so deeply unlikable, it was laughable. And I applaud R.F. Kuang for accomplishing that feat. But I also know that while she was writing this, there's no way she didn't find it really funny. So I'm starting to get into the point of the year where I kind of remember what I was reading. Um, I so one night after Athena gets, I believe it's a Netflix deal, they go back to her apartment and she dies. I'm not going to say how she dies because it's stupid enough that you need to experience it for yourself, but she dies. And somewhere in between that and calling the police, because that's what a good person does, June saw the manuscript for her new book sitting on her typewriter because Athena does not write her books on computers like us morals. She handwrites them and types them on a typewriter. Anyway, she finds a manuscript for her new book, which is supposed to essentially be like, her Pulitzer Prize moment. Like she described it to her, she's seen some of it. It's supposed to be really good. She snatches a manuscript and she essentially rebrands herself to be, we talked about passing, okay, black people passing, to be like a passing Asian. And that yeah, it's a whole thing. Anyway, some of my notes on this book is June's ability to justify stealing Athena's work without regret is amazing. She says why it's difficult but not impossible. She talks about an author not wanting their work to die with them, but then proceeds to erase Athena completely. And then I said June flips so fast on Athena. She goes from talking about Athena's mastery of the craft to saying her writing sucks and is too pompous and academic for anyone to understand. In some of the commentary afterwards and watching full interviews, R.F. Kuang said that the thriller aspect kind of came from just June being with herself and social media and like that scrolling of it. So maybe that didn't feel like much of a thriller to me because it just sounded like real life, but I don't know. Anyway, really good book. Go into it thinking contemporary fiction though, and definitely not a thriller. I'm debating between if I should put it in bears or cubs, but I feel like because like that thriller aspect was a little off for me, I'm gonna put that in cubs. Okay. Next book I read was Crazy Rich Asians, purely out of curiosity, because I, like you, have seen the movie. Okay, I've seen the movie. I love seeing the movie because I love looking at the beautiful costumes. The costumes in that movie are immaculate, but that's besides the point. I wanted to figure out what the book was like and see how that was adapted from source material into the movie that we now have. So, of course, Crazy Rich Asians is going to be contemporary fiction slash romance. And let me say, because I'm not even going to provide context for this because I mean, it's essentially kind of like a Cinderella story, except relating to incredibly rich people who live in Asia, Singapore to be specific. That movie did Nick Young so many favors because in this book, I would have broken up with him 17 times over. My summary literally says Nick Young is a stupid who needs to get a grip on reality and probably fired from his job as a professor. I said that there was more research about language and cultural context that went into this book than I was expecting, and that this book dives into the storylines of other characters so much more than the movie. I said, as a matter of fact, the romance between Rachel and Nick receives a very small amount of page time. And it also seemed to be one of the least interesting parts. I think Astrid's story is much more interesting. And then I made this one final note. I said, I've always found Nick's character in the movie to be questionable, but I realize now that those writers did him a favor. He is extremely stupid. He is adamant that his family is completely normal and he has no wealth to his name at all, and that he is a completely normal man. He prepared Rachel 0% for the insanity that she was going to get to in Singapore. I would have left. You don't just bring someone into a family like his with no context at all. Insane. Insane. I would say if you liked the movie because you liked Nick, don't read the book. If you want to know more about the other characters, read the book. Yeah, so for that one, I'm going to put it in Black Hawks. Because, like I said, it was not a bad book. It's just Nick was really stupid. First of all, I would just like to make a formal complaint because I finished that book at around 2:30 in the morning. And for those of you who have read Oathbound, and you know what happens in the last part of that book, imagine reading that half delirious at 2:30 in the morning. I got completely woken up. Because what do you mean? And now I have to wait to find out what happens next. I don't want to wait. Tracy, I need you to cough it up, man. I need you to tell me what's going on. Oh my god, this entire book, the series, all of it, it's actually right there. I got it for Christmas. It's so good. And I can't really explain anything that's happening in this book because it's the third book in the series. Like, telling anything that happens in this book is a spoiler for Bloodmarked. And if I tell you anything about Bloodmarked, then that's a spoil for Legendborn. Let me give you a general description of Legendborn from memory. It should be great. So, Legendborn. It is a book and a series that follows this order that was set forth by King Arthur and his knights. And they are all reincarnated through bloodlines, through family bloodlines, to help protect the planet from demons. And so, Bree, after one, I'm being very careful with my words right now. After seeing one of these demons on campus and seeing someone fight one of these demons on campus, gets pulled into the order. And then she also connects seeing that to her mother's death. So then she wants to get more into the order, and then everything just kind of explodes from there. That's all I can tell you about this book. It's really good. Tracy, if for any reason at all you come across this, please send me an advanced reader copy of the fourth book so I can know what happens next. Peace and love. Thank you. Also, I will add one note for this book. Will is that guy. Oathbound, straight to the top for you. Then after that, because I couldn't fathom just leaving my life there. I immediately jumped into reading A Crane Among Wolves by June Her. This is historical fiction YA. This book does have some real historical context to it. I'm not looking anything up, so I'm also not going to say anything wrong, but it is true that in Korean history, there was a king who was known to be extremely cruel. He killed people, took over lands, kidnapped young women and girls. Oh, truly a terrible man. Like, awful. God awful. And all of that historical context is laid out either at the beginning or in the end of the book. So it is very important to keep it in mind that this is based slightly in reality. So I said after reading this book, under the rule of a tyrant king, no one in Korea is safe. He kills those who disagree with him, kidnaps any woman who he seems fit, including Isu's sister. With no plan, no help, and little real-world experience, she travels to the capital, Seoul, to try to get her back. And while staying at the inn, she finds help, learns of a revolt, and disrupts the life of the king's little brother. I believe I rated this like just under like being a perfect book because oh my gosh, why? Why is Isu so unlikable? Oh my gosh, she's such a brat. Like, I specifically said, Isu's ego makes her highly, highly unlikable. Like, the more I read, the more she sucks. She's haughty, she's arrogant, she thinks that despite never having stepped foot in the real world herself, she knows how things work. A little context for that part. Her family was moderately wealthy, but they also lived outside of the capital. So her and her sister grew up very, 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 very sheltered. Like, and this happens in the beginning of the book, but I believe her parents died, or one of her parents died. And so things are changing and there's more that they have to do, like housework. And she had never scrubbed a dish before. And so when her sister's like, hey, I need you to help with the cleaning up, washing things, she's like, my hands were not made for washing dishes. And then she's like, I'm going to go storm Gyeongbokjeong Palace and I'm going to get my sister back. Like, girl, no. But it was still so good. The tension, amazing. The mystery plot that's baked in there too, so good. Um, if I was a person who cried, this book would have made me cry due to plot elements, but I am not a person who cries. So just know that if you are a crier, you might cry, but that's okay. It's a really good book. You should read it. Cubs. Okay, Real by Kennedy Ryan. This is another book that took me a month to finish. June 8th to July 7th. So, this book, Nevaeh is a young actress who just got her big break, and Cannon is the one who's going to give it to her. The story Cannon wants to tell is important. It needs to be told, and Nevaeh is the only actress with the chops to pull it off. But he never anticipated her health struggles or falling for the star of the biggest project of his career. So, this book is by Queen Kennedy Ryan. It follows two Black characters in the arts in Hollywood, and they are making a biopic about a jazz singer, I believe was her claim to fame, from, that particular era. And so, he stumbled upon the story himself. He wrote the script himself. Like, this is his awards piece. Directors will talk about like this was my award showcase, and even for Nevaeh, like the role itself, it's what they call Oscar bait. It's an Oscar bait role. So I mean, she is a Broadway understudy, and he just so happens to walk into the show that she gets to go on as the lead for the first time ever. And when he sees her, he's like, that's the girl I need to star in my movie. And then some problems with her health kind of come up that she keeps a secret, but it's essentially just the story of those two falling in love. Notes for this book. I said that the two Black women, so the woman who she is portraying in the film and Nevaeh, the story focuses, like their stories parallel each other, and I feel like it was a useful kind of writing device that Kennedy Ryan used. So yeah, that is the thing about this book. It is jumping between two storylines, the one about the woman who they are portraying in the film, and then Nevaeh's current timeline. But I feel like it works really well together because like something of that scene from the past will be explained, and then it'll fade into them filming that particular part of the movie. So I really, really liked that. I think it would adapt really good into either a movie or a TV show. Um, but yeah, overall, pretty good read. I think I slowed down a little bit in the end just because her health struggles became a much more prominent part of the story. And also, she has some very kind of messy family dynamics going on. And it kind of devolved into that and just and when it's a romance book, you know how things are going to work out. So it just kind of was like it got a little predictable for me in the end. But still a generally pretty good book. I'm just gonna go ahead and put it in my Blackhawks tier. Okay, next book, which is a complete shift from Real. I read Notes on an Execution. This book also took me like a month to get through. I started reading it that's funny. I started reading this before I finished Real. So I started reading it on June 26th, but I didn't finish it until the 15th of August. If you are someone who likes true crime but is off put by how it is handled and covered, then I would also recommend this to you. Because a lot of the times true crime will focus more on the criminal and glorifying them instead of A, getting permission from the people who are affected, and B, covering it from their perspective and their family's perspective and all and like that, especially when it comes to cases where people ultimately are no longer here. They tend to not be handled super duper well. So that is kind of like the turn that this book is taking. It is focusing on the women specifically who were affected by this very sad little man. So for my summary, I said, what do many prolific male serial killers have in common? Women. It's women who suffered by their hands, women who were obsessed with them, and women's stories that eventually put them away. And this is the story of those women. So specifically, this book follows his mother, the detective who ultimately gets him arrested, and there's one other person in there, the sister of, I believe it's a woman who dated him, or the sister of a woman who dated him and ended up dead, and was the catalyst to him getting arrested. Some of the notes I had on this book was Lavender, who was his mother. I remember that. Her point of view is very heartbreaking to read. And it's also unexpected how detached it is from Ansel, who is the killer, and her son. I said at the end of the book, one of the points that the author makes is that this story was focused on women and how this cruel man took the lives of women, a welcome juxtaposition to what happens in real life. This book also focuses on the butterfly effect. So the last chapter is about, I can't remember if it's about what the women who died couldn't do or what they would have done had they still been alive. So that last chapter really focuses in on like butterfly effect and all of that. So this was really, really interesting read. Um, and like I said, it diverged like completely from books that are normally written in this genre. It was kind of a fiction of like literary fiction along with crime reporting and a thriller. So for that, I will put it in the cups tier. So the faking game. Truly, I have no notes because I really don't remember reading this book like at all. Let's see. My context says Nora is on the run, but good thing she's rich. A stalker forces Nora to leave Europe and move to New York City. Oh no, the horror. To be under the protection of her brother's best friend. Why does he have these resources? I don't think we know. But more than protection, Wes helps her overcome her chronic people pleasing. I said the nickname Trouble is the true antagonist of this book. And then I also said at 40% through the book, the author decided to introduce a plot about a previous friend, which ended up being completely irrelevant. Why couldn't he be the stalker? Yes, I also am pretty sure the stalker plot ends up being either stupid or completely irrelevant. So for that, I'm going to put this book in bulls because it at least like when I think about a bad book, they're on here. But for something to truly be like bad, like rock bottom. Oh my God, who let this get here? Bad, it takes a lot. And that was not that bad. There were plot issues, there were cringy nicknames. Honestly, the writing was not bad. The characters were not deeply unlikable due to the writing, so I will not put it that far down. Let's talk about one of my most anticipated and most disappointing reads of the year, The Favorites by Lane, Fargo. I had extremely high expectations for this book because of the reviews I was seeing on YouTube mainly, um, the premise, and the author. So Lane Fargo has written a thriller called They Never Learn. And that book, I would say read it. I've read that book 2 or 3 times now. That's a really, really good book. This is not a very good book. It made me really, really sad. I gave it a bad rating. And for my like personal summary of it, I said Kat and Heath are talented, driven, and broke. The thing that gets them noticed by Olympic champion Sheila Lynn isn't impeccable technique, it's Kat's unrelenting desire to win. And if that was all that mattered, then they would be champions. But then, like slightly below this, I literally wrote down how much ish can 2 people take. So my notes on this book was that Heath is clearly expendable to Kat. He means he's a means to the end at best, and if she was ever able to have a better partner, then she will 100% leave him behind. I feel like so many plot lines were left completely open during the book. Like Kat's hip in part one, what happened to it? Is it a lingering injury that she had to work with? Moreover, Heath's entire backstory is constantly mentioned or alluded to, but we never get the smallest detail about what actually happened. And then I said, this is how the plot of this book goes. And then I made a little illustration. You go up, and something's going to happen, and then everything falls apart. And then you go up, and something's going to happen, and then everything falls apart. And that just repeats the entire time. The entire time. I said there's a disconnect between Kat's on and off ice personality, and not in a well-written way. And the author is giving me whiplash way. So overall, that was just not a fun experience for me. It's going in the White Sox category. I didn't get it, guys. and I'm not sorry. So the next book, and I'm actually going to do two at the same time. I'm going to do Handmaid's Tale and Fahrenheit 451 because these books are ranked the same for the same reason. And that reason is they are correct in having the acclaim that they have because of the plot, the topics, the theme, all of those things. But for me and my brain, the way that the author's style of writing just did not click. With The Handmaid's Tale, I had a lot of needing to go and look things up. It felt very much so like a book that you read in school where you read it and you don't know what's happening. So then you go and you read the summary and then you go back and everything makes a little bit more sense. I feel like most people know what The Handmaid's Tale is about, but I will run through my little summary really quick. I said, disease and low fertility rates had put America into chaos, so a new government has taken over, based in religion and patriarchy. They have stripped women of all their autonomy. Divided into roles, the handmaids are fertile young women who are forced to have babies for families that they live with. So basically, a horror book, in my opinion. Like I said, the plot, first of all, bone chilling. Ew, gross. Don't want any of that. The plot, insane. At moments, this book had where I was following. I was following and I was locked in and I was with her. So, like I said, it's a great book. It's just the writing style. It just did not click with my brain, even though the execution was masterful. I wrote this on paper when I finished the book. Writing style does not click with my brain, even though I can tell it is masterfully written. So, for that, and let me give you the same context for Fahrenheit 451. So for Fahrenheit 451, this is a dystopian fiction that focuses on censorship. Maybe I was going through a phase at this time. I don't know. I read both these books within like a month of each other. So within, again, this one has been made into a movie and a lot of people know what it's about. So for this one, the context is they burned books. Books cause fractions in thinking. It made society volatile. Enter the firemen, no longer tasked with saving lives, they burn books. Until one day, Montag, who is the main character of the book, sees a woman who refuses to leave her books and burns with them. It pushes him to wonder what could be in those books. It is this event and the quick relationship he built with a young neighbor that pushes him to test society. Again, masterfully written, important theme, important messaging, just not writing that clicked with my brain. So both of these books are going in the Blackhawks tier. Ah. Next book, Where Sleeping Girls Lie. This one caught me off guard. It only took me 2 days to finish it, and I will say, if you love Legendborn, if you enjoy the dark academia setting, and if you love like a good ensemble cast, you will enjoy this book. Orphan Sade is beginning her fall semester at Alfred Noble Academy. Her late arrival isn't peaceful, as a few days later her roommate vanishes, and a complicated web of lies seems to unravel around her, which is exactly what she wanted. This book actually had a twist that happened right at the correct time, that it was right when you were starting to figure out what was going on, but even still, if I remember correctly, there was still a bit more to it that you're like, oh, wait, wow, that's even more than I was expecting. So the build up to the twist is good. It doesn't give it away, but it also makes sense, right? A twist is supposed to make sense, guys. A twist is supposed to make sense. So the one note that I will say for this book is based on the cover, because I do judge books by the covers. I was expecting a completely different vibe going into this book. This book is a lot more humorous and funny than you would expect by looking at the cover. You figure looking at the cover, you're getting yourself into something that's going to read like The Secret History, and it finds ways to break that, which is what really shocked me. So, again, good book for this year. I'm going to put that in Cubs. Cubs tier. Okay, I'm finally getting down to some of the final ones. I can't imagine if I read more books than this, how long this would take. And I'm not even ranting about things I want to rant about, because the rants are coming up. This next book, and debut authors, first time authors, all the kinds of authors. It's a process, it's a struggle. Please hire editors. I'm begging. Please, please, please hire editors, because if I know your grammar is bad, then your grammar is atrocious. This book, At the Waterfall, had such a good foundational ideal around it, especially if you think about history in the United States of America. Such a good ideal around it. Execution, toddler sledding for the first time. Really bad. So this book focuses on this character named Mia. Mia is currently under the harsh watch of her father, and she's in medical school, even though she dreams of being an author like her late mother. Knowing this, her mother rented Mia a cabin in Vermont to work on her craft over the summer. However, due to a mix-up with the reservation, she has to share the house with Jake, who's returning to help fix his family's struggling hotel. Here's my note that I wrote in one long thing about this book. From plot inconsistencies to poor editing and no character development, along with many more things, this entire book screams poorly written through a microphone. It feels like a book on Wattpad from 2013 was self-published with no editing or revision. I have several notes throughout the book covering everything from basic mistakes and poor word choice to major plot inconsistencies and lackluster character development. It is bad, as in White Sox tier bad. Never waste my time like that ever again. The behemoth that I read last year, Secret History. It took 2 weeks. Started on the 29th of September, finished on the 13th of October. This book was way smarter than me, so it took me a while to get through its depths. If you see it and you're like, oh, that shouldn't be too bad to read through, it's like reading a textbook where one page of information and words is really equivalent to about 20 to 25 pages. That's kind of what that feels like. That's the best analogy I can give for reading Secret History. My summary of this book is one sentence that has nothing to do with the book. The Secret History is, it follows a man named Richard Penn as he goes to study at this elite but very isolated private school in, I don't remember specifically where in New England, but in New England, so think Ivy League. And so when he gets there, he finds out about this very exclusive, very elite Greek program, and he wants in. And he gets in, and he ends up meeting these 5 other students, 4 or 5, I think it's 5 other students who all come from wealthy backgrounds and are extremely, extremely intelligent, especially when it comes to Greek. And there's just some crazy, crazy stuff going on with this little cohort of students that eventually leads to death. And yeah, it's a very wild time. Like when I got to the part that explained what was going on with the other student, I was lost. Because what do you mean? But for my summary, I said everyone sucks, but at least they're smart and rich. The former is debatable. For some of my notes on this book, I said, I see how Babel is so comparable to this. I also mentioned how Bunny, who is one of the characters, how his characterization is some of the most intense I've read. He first comes off as a bit dumb, very out of touch, and completely full of himself, but not cruel until he is. I also mentioned that I don't find Henry's choice at the end super shocking. And I have more written down, but if I go through all of it, it is a spoiler. And since I never got any spoilers on this book, even though it was written well before I was alive, I'm not going to give any spoilers because it just does not seem to be particularly a very spoiled book. So I would definitely say give it a try, but give it a try when you're in the mood to give it a try. Do not give it a try if you want to read something light and fluffy and fast. Anyway, The Secret History, Donna Tartt. Retrospectively, I gave it a higher rating before, but I'm going to put it right in the middle of the pack. So then after I finished The Secret History, technically after I read The Secret History, I was deeply in need of something light, but I instead decided to read Fahrenheit 451, which is also why I think that book might have gotten a slightly lower rating. I don't think my brain was ready to again jump into something that was as dense and thematically focused as Fahrenheit 451. But then after that, I jumped right into a whole lot of nothing. And it was so nothing that I don't remember reading this book. That's my note about this book. I don't remember reading this book. The book in question is called The Wingman by Stephanie Archer. My summary says Darcy needs a favor. She needs a dating coach, and her best friend Hayden is the perfect man for the job. But how far can the bounds of their friendship be tested? Even sitting here right now, I don't remember anything about this book. Nothing. Nothing at all. So, yeah, I feel like for the crime of being boring, I should put it in the bottom, but the books in the bottom were bad. Like, made me angry bad. And I don't remember thinking this book was bad. If it was bad, I would remember it. So I'm going to put it in bulls. Okay. I'm excited for the next one. The next book is Unbound by Peyton Corinne. This was an arc, so it's not officially out yet. I believe it comes out sometime in the first half of this year, but I don't know off the top of my head. Gosh, this book, if you need angst in your romance, and not like a little angst, like a high dose of angst, immediately pre-order this right now. I have read the other two books in the series. You do not need to have read the other two books in the series to read this one. So if this one is the only one that seems interesting to you, I would definitely order it and read it. But I will say the first book in the series is immaculate. So I would definitely read this one. I would definitely, if I had to rank them, I would say Unloved, and then no, Unloved, Unbound, and then nope, not Unloved. What's the first one called? Unsteady. If I had to rank them, I would say Unsteady, Unbound, Unloved. They're really good. So, and here's the thing, this is technically a second chance romance book. I don't normally do that. I do not normally do second chance romance books because most of the time, whenever you find out the reason why they broke up in the first place, I generally think that they should remain broken up with. And for some reason, they don't do that. So, yeah, actually, for this review, I took it straight off the author's website. I don't know if that was foresight, but it was smart. So, we're going to read what the blurb is at this moment. Unbeknownst to their friends, Bennett and Paloma were each other's first real love, which ended in heartbreak. Bennett still doesn't know what happened, and despite being the one who ended things, Paloma still craves him. For years, Bennett has remained her protective shadow, coming to Paloma's rescue whenever she asks. That's the blurb from the author's website, and since it is not out yet, that is all I'm going to read off. For my notes, I'm going to scan them before I read them. I said Bennett has so many scenes where he is excellently characterized as an observer and protector, which really matches his whole looming shadow characterization from earlier books. Yeah, in the first books, Bennett is always there, but he never says much. He's just there. And he's always there, but he's not doing much. Paloma is instantly different from how she is described in earlier books. Yes. One of my favorite quotes not my favorite quote, because I don't know if it's a quote, but something I always tell myself, especially when I'm looking at like female celebrities or dancers, actresses, singers, is that they hate it when they're smart. They want you to just be dumb. And I feel like that characterization, like that saying that I always mention, is something that people want to apply to Paloma, but it doesn't. Her characterization from the first two books in the series is completely torn down in this book, and I love it. I will say, and this is super important to the book actually, is that Bennett is diagnosed as being autistic and having OCD, and that is very, 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 very important to the story. So I don't know if I described it really well or if I hyped it up really well, but here's what I will say. Most of the time, which I know may not seem true based on this list, is romance books involving sports generally piss me off because the authors clearly know nothing about sports. Number one, this book is kind of decentered from sports, which is intentional. And number two, it did not make me mad because she is generally well researched in what she's putting on the page in relation to both mental health and sport. So read it. Definitely read it. definitely put it on your list for upcoming releases this year because it's a good one. So for that, I'm going to put it in Cubs because I had a few small issues with it, and they're mostly things like what is Paloma's major? Because she does this section where she's doing an internship and she's interning with the hockey team because proximity, whatever. But it doesn't make sense because she's a business major, but she's in with the hockey team, but she wants to coach hockey, but she hasn't played hockey. Which, first of all, I believe is an oversight because I think Paloma on skates would have been great. And then the timeline in the beginning, we do bounce between two different timelines, and it takes a second for it to kind of settle in and like flow, and for you to know when you're reading from one timeline and when you're reading from another one. It is mentioned at the beginning of every chapter, but still, it can get like a little bit clunky in the beginning. But still, great read, great book. Highly recommend when it comes out. On to the next. I'm down to six books. Next book is First Position by Melanie Hemrick. This book is for people who want the Dance Academy Gossip Girl crossover. If you've also watched both of those shows growing up, then we can be friends. This book made me mad, but not in it was bad way, just in a you can tell whenever I'm mad reading a book because my summaries get very short. This book, for the context, I wrote, don't fall in love with rich and powerful men. Your career will be ruined and he will get a promotion. So basically, this book follows a dancer who was extremely promising and she ends up getting into a relationship with her, I believe it's the creative director, artistic director of her ballet company. And ultimately, when that comes to light, it is all pinned on her and her delusions as a young dancer, and it ruins her career, and he gets away scot free. So we're following both that relationship in real time, how that relationship affects another dancer that she's in the company with and that she's very close friends with at that time, and how she's trying to put everything back together now in this present timeline. While I was reading it, because this book was written by someone who was a professional dancer, so I did say I wonder how much of this cattiness is true to ballet and like her experiences, and if she dramatized it or if she could like name people and drop them into some of the roles that she wrote in her book. I said, please no more cringy nicknames. Oh my god. And then Sylvie, who is our main character, she has a plethora of issues. I would definitely Google trigger warnings about this book before reading it because, God, there are so many of them relating to eating and drugs and so many things. Like, wow, like a creative number of things, actually. But this was a good book. It was engaging. I read it on my trip to New York City, and it was definitely a page turner. I got through it. It took me a little bit longer to get through it because I was getting interrupted while I was reading, but still, like I said, if you like Gossip Girl and you liked Dance Academy, then this is the perfect literary crossover of that. There's actually a second book that she wrote in continuation of this one that follows Jocelyn, her kind of fall from grace afterwards. So I think I'm going to read that one too. I just don't know when. So for this book, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the Blackhawks tier and then get into the book that made me the most angry this year. Oh, not yet, I guess. I think I got these two mixed up too, but this one was also really bad. Love Letters to a Serial Killer by Tasha Coriel. Skip it. Oh my gosh. Like most of my comment that says under like to be recommended to, I literally wrote, do not read this unless you adore trashy reality TV. For like the general plot of the book, it says Hannah is completely aimless until a string of murders captures the nation's attention, and most importantly, Hannah's. Eventually her infatuation grows, and she writes to him in prison, where the infatuation continues to grow, and she ends up giving up what little she has to begin with to be with him. But is she actually in love with the killer? Sometimes I write these like I'm trying to sell the book. Okay, it was bad. The main plot of the book is slow. We don't get to the interactions with the serial killer until damn near 2/3 of the way through. And then for the twist at the end, I predicted it at Page 245. I knew exactly what was going to happen. I was completely right. So yeah, I'm going to make a separate video about my worst books because I feel like ranting is appropriate, but I can't get into all of that. Just know that the characters have no development, the plot is sloppy and slow moving, and the twist is extremely predictable at the end. And for that, it's getting banished to the land of the White Sox. Next book, which is going to go right next to its friend, is The Truth According to Ember. I literally wrote, I would not recommend this in good faith. For the summary, it says Amber is delusional and believes she deserves a job despite not having obvious qualifications, so she lies about that and whatever else she chooses. And when I went and I looked up reviews on this book, because I was very confident in my opinion that it was bad, but I needed to further be surrounded by people who shared my opinion. So I went and I looked up reviews, and everyone was in agreement that her lying got to a point where it was so stupid. It's like, what are you doing? I said, the writing style in first person reads like a teenager's diary. And at first I was wondering, is that intentional? Is that something that's going to develop? No, it's just like that, the ramblings of a teenage girl. And then it also has a lot of moments where conflicts are introduced just to be solved like 2 or 3 pages later. Therefore, that means it was not actually a conflict in the first place. And this book could have been 150 pages shorter. But yeah, that was, I wanted that book to be good so bad because a lot of the time you don't see, I put like a tiny rant review of this in the beginning of one of my videos, but you want a book featuring Native American characters in just regular contemporary romance to be good because you don't see a lot of that. And if this book does bad, then publishers will not pick up other books like this, which is, exactly what June from Yellowface doesn't think happens, but I digress. So I wanted this book to be good, and I'm really kind of laying it down to rest because I don't want this one being bad to affect the ability of other authors who will be able to execute stories like this well from getting their moment in the sun. But this is getting banished to Chicago White Sox land. It was so bad. It was so bad. Next book, and this is kind of leading into what I read during December, Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. So this one, I was kind of anticipating to be a bit like Welcome to the Huningdong Bookshop, because to be fair, the titles are very similar. One is set in Korea, Huningdong, and one is set in Japan, Morisaki. At the end of the day, two separate authors from two separate cultures who were done by two separate translators. And I will say that about all the translated books that are on here that I read this year, which I believe are 3, is that unless you can read the source material, it's really hard to establish fully whether the book was bad. You can definitely still establish whether or not you like it, but it's hard to establish whether or not it was bad or if you disliked it because things get lost in translation. And like it's always a dream career that I mentioned being a translator. The problem with that is I only speak English. What happens when you translate a book is not someone sitting at a table and going through line by line and translating word for word. They essentially have to take the story and not redo it, but rework it so it makes sense in another language. I believe that things like pacing and stuff, that will be translated. And for me, I feel like it was just the pacing and kind of the jumpiness of this book. This book follows Takako, who her life in Tokyo kind of falls apart. She was dating this guy, and it turns out he was cheating on her the entire time, and she was the other woman. And they work together, so she has to see him at work, so she ends up quitting her job, and Tokyo's expensive, so she ends up moving into a room above the bookshop that her uncle owned, the Morisaki bookshop, until she gets back on her feet. That's one half of the story. And then the other half kind of has them doing a little bit of a role reversal where she helps him at a certain point in his life. So my notes on this book were that I feel like, because initially Takako, her uncle, what is her uncle's name? Satoru. She holds a lot of resentment towards him in a way that is extremely negative and very unearned on his part because he's just not, he did not take like that traditional, very stable path that a lot of people do, like college, office job, all that. He didn't do that. And I feel like in the beginning of the book, she cannot wrap her head around why he didn't do that. So she has a lot of resentment and rudeness to him at the beginning, even though he is giving her a place to stay rent free. Yeah, I say Takako is deeply unlikable at the beginning of the book, and it really has nothing to do with her recently failed relationship or having to quit her job. It just seems like ingrained in her character. That's all I have to say on Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. I'm going to put it running, mm, yeah, right at the middle of the pack for me. It wasn't amazing, but it also was by no means bad. Second to last book we have is Forecasting the Forward by Jennifer J. Williams. You know, for someone who says that I really don't read romance books set in hockey settings, I really did read a lot of those this year. I should consider diversifying. So this one, I said Becca comes from a comically evil family despite having the agency to get herself out of that situation. All of that willpower and ambition goes out the door when Johnny Hockey shows up. Yeah, this is a book that suffers from um, a very sad disease where women lose all ambition and ability to do anything as soon as big strong man comes in, despite coming from a background and situation where she already had to do everything for herself to get to where she is. And you could argue that we're going for the she's tired, she just wants someone to look out for her, but like no. There's like a level to that, there's a point to that. And number one, it's like a slowly melting away thing that happens. It is not instant. And for her it was instant. There was a lot of very poor writing in this, from personalities and opinions that come from Becca to plot holes and just, again, introducing conflict only to resolve it 2 pages later. And then a lot of the antagonists in this book were cartoonishly evil. Like they are put in the book and they have no depth or finesse or anything. They're just cartoonishly evil. So yeah, this was also pretty bad. Wasted my time. I literally said none of Becca's characteristics match her actions. The conflict in this book was made out of wet toilet paper. I said there are zero side characters in this book that have any staying power. We don't know anybody who's had a positive impact on Becca's life outside of Jax, who is the main male character in this book. She allegedly has a best friend, but never interacts with her whatsoever. So yeah, this one again just falls into the case of poorly written. Why did you do that? Why? And we'll also be going into the Chicago White Sox category. We are finally at the last book that I read last year. I believe is falling more into a incorrectly marketed bracket than anything. So let's talk about Butter the book and let's talk about Butter the marketing. So Butter by Sakura Uzuki is originally written in Japanese. It was translated and it is a thriller slash mystery. It took me a while to get through it from the 12th of December all the way to the 23rd. For context in this book, I'll read my little summary and then I'll provide a little bit of additional. So I basically said in my summary, how can somebody be killed and what counts as murder? Kaji is charged and sentenced for the murder she may or may not have committed. And in the process of interviewing her, Kaji's presence impacts the life of the journalist who was set to the task. So this book follows Rika, who is, it seems like a more senior journalist at a magazine, and she is trying to write the story that's going to get her onto the editorial team. That's the entire goal. So she decides to go and interview this serial killer named Manako Kachi, who is accused of killing rich men after seducing them with food and robbing them. Except we never know whether or not Kachi is guilty. This book is less about the thriller and mystery of finding out whether or not she committed these crimes or how she committed these crimes, and focuses a lot more on the other characters in the book and their relationships, to the point that in the front cover of my copy, I made a character list and wrote down relationships and attributes and kind of how those develop throughout the book. It's also much more a commentary on feminism and modern Japanese society than it is a thriller in any way, shape, or form. it is still a good book. It's a hungry book. You will be hungry when you read this. It talks a lot about food. Food is a cornerstone of this book, but I would not categorize it as a mystery thriller. It's much closer to literary fiction, I would say, in the sense that it is much more character focused than it is plot focused. It can get slow, it can get draggy, and we're definitely not focused on aspects that are popular, in my opinion, of a thriller book. I would definitely still give it a try, but I would not give it a try if you're looking for those tropes and plot devices that come with reading a mystery or thriller book. I would read it if you're in the mood for something that is following character and how characters are impacted by someone who has a massive presence, like someone like a Monica Kachi would. I'm going to put this book, unsurprisingly, middle of the pack in Blackhawks, and that will complete my tier list and the longest screen recorded video I have ever put together. I would say overall, I feel like I had a pretty good year reading last year. As you can see by this chart, it's much heavier on the top than it is on the bottom. So I really feel like that's all you can ask for. Those books in that White Sox tier, particularly The Favorites and The Truth According to Ember and Love Letters to a Serial Killer, were, I couldn't tell you not to read them enough. Don't do it. Don't waste your time. That took moments from my life that I'm not going to get back. But looking forward into the new year, I'm not setting any goals for how many books I want to read because might have time. Who knows what's going to happen? I definitely want to diversify more. I feel like I did a pretty good job of that this year. Just looking over it, I got a lot more into translated fiction, and I want to keep going down that road. Not just books from Korea and Japan, but I also want to read books from literally anywhere. I will read a book translated from any language at all. I think I want to read more, not horror, but mystery like thriller books. I find those really entertaining. I really did not read a lot of those this year. But yeah, I definitely want to pick up more in like those two genres. I hope that I have more five-star books this year because even after reading, I have four books in like my top tier category this year, and I definitely agree with that now, but even while I was reading before having like a retrospective on it, only two of these books were up there, and that was The Swans of Harlem and Oathbound. Those are the only two unanimous consensus straight to the top five-star reads I had this year. So I hope I have like maybe one or two more. I don't know, but that is everything I read last year, and now I'm done talking because I've been doing this for 2 hours.